Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our town center this afternoon, hall this afternoon. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things, or at least a couple things that are important. And I will try and step through those very quickly so that we can get to the part that most of you came for, and that's the asking of the questions. Interestingly enough, I went to a bigger venue, and I see that it is not quite as full as I would have liked. I've liked. Anyway, but it's good. It's good. I'm happy you're here, truly. So, our discussion today is going to be about reserves. And the first part of this, if you've ever been in an HOA, been a board member at another HOA, especially in another state besides Tennessee, I'm going to apologize at the gate that some of this you're going to go, I know that, I know that. But for those of you who have not been in those kinds of situations or not been directly involved with that, I'm hoping that you will find this informative and help you better understand how we as the executive staff and the board go about trying to manage the POA by using reserves. So the first question is, what are reserves? They're an account that by law has to be a separate account, has to be kept in a separate bank account, I should say. And there should be never any commingling of funds. That's a really interesting word that has to do with we can't put other money in there besides just what's going to be spent on reserves. It has some guidelines with it that normally most associations define reserves as one of two categories. Well, actually there's four, but we'll start with the first two. The first two are, how do we fund it? How do we decide this is going to be a reserve expenditure that we need to do? And the general, and I emphasize general rule is, if it costs more than $10,000 or it's going to last more than 3 years, it's a reserve. Now, we can argue and debate about those seem either too big or too small, but those are the general parameters that almost all HOAs approach reserves from, regardless of their budget or size. The second thing is that what gets paid out of reserves. Now, we talked about individual items, but we didn't talk about the fact that we can pay for new items, new amenities out of reserves, or new machinery out of reserves, or, and what is more usually the case, we pay for it for repairs and replacements, those kinds of things. So, as you look at our reserves over the years, we have had, I know there's been some discussion, but we have actually set some money aside every year for reserves. The only thing that has happened differently and appropriately is that we decided to have a reserve study. And what that did was go out and tell us, what are our buildings actually worth? What is our infrastructure actually worth? And how much money do we need to be able to take care of that? And of course, at that point in time, now the debate begins. How much do we need to have? For how long? How often? The list just goes on and on. So when we talk about it, reserves are in general, as I mentioned earlier, they're broken up into kind of two categories. One of them is new amenities, and I define new amenities everything from a new building to a new lawnmower, a new shed to store stuff in. Those are all amenities. Those are all things that we never had before that we're buying new. And then we have what is usually referred to as the 3 R's: repair, replace, and remodel. And those are the standard things that we have to do. Now, I think I may have said this at the first town hall. I know I've said it at several board meetings, but if I were to sum up my job in one sentence, it would be to protect your investment. And so reserves are specifically there to protect your investment and to protect you. There should never be a time, if I've done my job right, and this is kind of one of those bridges that most property managers, CEOs, and general managers, a bridge they really don't like to jump off of. but it's the truth. If there ever comes a day where I stand up here and I say, I'm going to have to send out a letter to all of you assessing you for X number of dollars, what that means is I didn't do my job. Because my job is to protect you from ever having to do that by managing both the reserves and the ongoing operational budget correctly. And that takes usually some time and some foresight to be able to do that. But that is my job. So the last question that's brought up is, how much do we need? That's an argument. If you looked at the actual document, it says that in 30 years we will need to have accumulated right at $400 million. Now, I give this kind of tongue-in-cheek as an answer, but it's really the truth. If you step back from the somewhat humor of it and look at it, it's really real. If every building and every infrastructure in this community was destroyed, we'd need $400 million to replace it in 30 years. My answer to you is, if everything in this area is completely destroyed, do you really think we care? I mean, really, it's kind of like that amendment to insurances for terrorists. If somebody dropped an atomic bomb on Knoxville, do you think we'd really care if we were covered or not? That's the same principle here. So it's a tongue-in-cheek way of saying we really don't need $300 million ever in our reserves, because we're never going to be in a situation where the entire community and all its infrastructure is destroyed. That's just never going to happen. So then it comes down to the practical. What do we really think we would need to keep in our budget? And the answer to that so far is somewhere between $30 and $40 million. Now, why that? Let me give you some scenarios that could potentially put us in that. A tornado comes through and completely decimates the wellness center and everything that goes along with it. That's probably going to be close to $30 million. Tornado comes through, or worse, a hurricane or remnants of a hurricane comes through, the lake floods, and all of our greens that are at water level or at least 10 feet above the current pool for the lake would then be buried in water and ruined. And we'd have to replace those specific greens, not the entire golf course. Again, you're in the millions of dollars. But that's it. That's our worst case scenario. And the wellness center obviously could be built for less than $30 million. And some of these other things could be done for less than $30 million. But if the wellness center was destroyed by a tornado, the odds are we'd have a few more buildings destroyed too. So that's what we plan for, is the most logical worst answer. And that's the best we can do. And at the end of the day, it keeps us where we are logical about how much money we keep in the bank. The other thing to keep in mind is that every year, those 3 R's kick in. So for argument's sake, we bring in $7, $8 million in a year. Well, we may spend 3 or 4 of that in that year. And then in the next year, we may only spend a couple $100,000. And the year after that, we may spend $14 million. And I hope you can see from this, there's a constant ebb and flow. Money coming in, money going out. That's why we save it, and we try and collect as much as we can and stay ahead of it as much as we can, so that we have the ability to pay for those things as things break or they get to the point where they need to be repaired. One of the things we don't want to get into is deferred maintenance. And that is where we decide, well, we don't want to spend that money this year. And I think some of you were at the board meeting where I told the story about the high-rise down in West Palm Beach, or just north of Miami, that had part of their parking garage collapse and half of their building cave in, and 50-something people were killed. That story in and of itself is bad. But what makes it really bad is 3 years earlier than that, the board, in their wisdom, and I mean that sincerely, brought in engineers to look at their building, and the engineers told them, you are a very short time away from a catastrophic event. And they said, well, okay, what does that mean? And it says it means you're going to have to cough up probably around $5 million to repair your underground parking in that part of the building and the columns that are failing. And they all looked at each other and said, that's way too much money to spend right now. We don't want to do it. I think if you asked them that question today, they would say that's pennies on the dollar. And so that's why I'm saying if there's ever a time where we get into those kinds of deferred maintenance or I have to come to you for an assessment, that's because something has gone entirely wrong and I did not do my job. So reserves are important. They protect you. They're a part of your personal investment in this community. And they're a part of why the board does their fiduciary responsibilities to you by maintaining and managing those reserves. I think that's enough boring you with the details. So one last thing. On April 6th, I'm going to hold another meeting similar to this, and it will be for those people who are currently leasing their homes, short-term or long-term, don't care. It's also for the real estate folks who manage people's homes here, who don't live here, for rentals. And it's going to be an open discussion about how the POA should be managing the rental situation. Now, right now, there are no rules, or the rules that we have are great. I can't enforce them. But we now are getting ready to make some changes in our documents that allow us to do that. And I don't want to make them willy-nilly. I want to go to the source of the people who it will directly affect. Most of you who are homeowners who are not renting or short-term rentals could probably care less one way or the other. So that's why this particular meeting is devoted to them specifically. It's open, anybody can come, but that's who I'd like to have that meeting for. So I'm announcing it now, so if you know friends who rent, you may suggest that they come to that. And this is not about me trying to figure out all the people who rent in the community. I sincerely want their opinions and want their input on how we move forward with these rules. So let's go ahead and get to the part that everybody likes, and that's the open forum part. Now, the board is here with me this evening so that any questions you may have that you've wanted to ask the board and either couldn't because it wasn't on the agenda in the board meeting or it was a topic that went by and you didn't have a chance to ask your question, now's the time to do it. Board meetings are really business meetings. They're not town halls. And one of the reasons why I asked the board here is to give you the opportunity to ask those questions that you try and ask sometimes at a board meeting that really isn't appropriate for a business meeting, but it is perfectly appropriate for a town hall. And so I would ask any of those questions, bring them up, let's hear from you. And of course, if you have any for me, I'm already ready to talk to you. That'll be good. Okay, who's up? What you got? Just come on up to the mic. You don't have to raise your hand. Oh, I'm getting queued up that I missed something, but come on up. So one of the things which you can't read, so it doesn't matter that you missed it. It's too small. One of the things I wanted to show you, and please don't go anywhere. You can come on up and get in line. It's okay. I'll be 2 seconds here. What I was trying to show you here is that over a 10-year plan, we budget out what we're going to spend for the reserves and the capital expenditures. And at the end of the year, and again, regrettably, you can't read this. One day I'm going to figure out what the size is that you can read on the screen. But you start at a fee at the top, and as you work down through those numbers, if you see at the bottom, that's how much we have in the bank at the end of the year. At the next year, you'll see that that number moves to the top of the column, and we go through all those expenditures. When we get to the end of the year, that's how much money we have left over. And you'll see it doing this all the way down that line. And at the end, and 10 years out, we're right at about $30 million. And that's where we wanted to be. So I apologize that that's not as crisp and clean. We'll have to figure out how we can make that better. For those of you who are online, I guess you can probably read it better than those who are here. Anyway, sorry. I wanted you to hear that. I wanted you to at least have a chance to see that or hear that. But
after listening to you, Chad, I'd like to know, we do have insurance here, right, on our properties and such?
I'm sorry, say again?
We do have insurance on our properties?
Oh, of course.
Okay, I mean, you talk like we're going to flip the whole bill for everything. if something
Well,
happened?
insurances do their best, but we do have, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not depreciation, it is, it's what we have to pay when the insurance doesn't cover everything, so a deductible.
gap
Thank you, I
item,
forgot to the D's there, deductible.
Okay.
And so we also maintain that, or that's a part of our calculation with that, with insurance. And again, insurance has gotten tricky, and I'll give you some examples. I understand where you're going with this, and I appreciate it, but I want to be clear about it. As an example, this year our docks, we're trying to get those insured, and we're going back and forth about what we should do, and that's still under discussion. But the insurance company said, we're not going to offer you replacement insurance. We're going to only offer you its depreciated value. And so that again comes back to, depending on how the insurance is set up, is it has depreciated value, and that's what the only thing the insurance will pay. Then we still have to have that extra money to be able to replace it. But go ahead. Sorry. Finish your question.
Okay. Actually, these are questions I wasn't even thinking of until I heard you. The other one is, when you're putting money in reserve, obviously you're putting it into some sort of bonds or something that keeps up with inflation.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And by the way, just to pause on that for a minute so people don't go with that too far, we also are putting in ones that never let us lose money. More or less, it may not make a whole lot of money in a year one way or the other, but we're never going backwards.
I mean, because a reserve is not good if it can't keep up with the cost of what things could be if you have to use it. So, but here's one thing that I really came for. Talking about this, what was it, $2,500 for new people coming in?
Sure.
I'm a blue-collar guy. What I don't want, what bothers me is, I don't want this community to become a rich man's community.
Sure.
Okay? That's my biggest fear, that once the blue-collar people are gone, this is going to be nothing but a rich man's community. And already you've seen some of that. You know, there's a lot of people with deep pockets here. You know, you see the Mercedes and the Jags and the Mustang, fancy Mustangs, and Corvettes driving around. I see the nice houses being built up, you know, and that's fine. I'm glad for them. But let's not turn this into a rich man's community and make it where a person that went in every day and worked a regular job can't afford to live here. So, you know, just be careful where you go. And the other is, once something's started, it's always used as a tool to add on to. I've seen that with every government. That's all we're going to do is charge this. Next thing, let's add another 500. Let's add another 1,000. Let's add more percentages, and pretty soon it's out of hand. So you put some sort of buffer in there that stops how high or how many years before maybe you can change that price on there.
We are, just to your point, we are working at looking at changing the language, and maybe the $2,500 per home is not the best interest. Maybe the better place to do it is doing a percentage of the sale of the home, not unlike how the taxes Loudoun County puts on us.
Okay,
It's based on the square footage of the house, that sort of thing. Thank you very much. Yep. Yeah, please. Board, do you have any comment?
I just wanted to add, when you talk about be careful not to make this a rich person's destination. You know, as a board, and Chet too, the amount that we ask all the residents, all of us, to share in is all based on our cost structure. So it's not like we're asking for money. We because we're residents too, but we're not trying to collect a bunch of money. All the money that's collected goes towards the repairs and maintenance and new amenities that we all own. So it's not like we're just raising taxes to raise taxes, and all this money that's collected, there's a forecast, and what's missing from that forecast right now is long-range planning has their long-range plan. And one of the things that we're going to try to do this year is incorporate those things that we need to be doing from a long-range planning perspective into this model as well. So this isn't the complete picture, but we're trying to get there so we have a realistic outlook of where we're going over the next 20 years, right? So we're not caught in a situation like Chet was referring to where we have to have a special assessment. So I hear you. I mean, none of us want our assessments to go up. I don't either. But we do have to look at what's in front of us, 35-year-old infrastructure, and we got to be sure that we're ready in case something does happen. And I think what we're doing right now is appropriate. And
I think you're doing a good job. I didn't criticize anything that you're doing.
and I just wanted to explain.
Where it goes, if this doesn't become a rich man's community.
He just repeated himself by saying he just hopes it doesn't become a rich man's community. And by all means, I agree with that. Everything that we ask of all residents, including us, is based on our cost structure. And if you sit through our budget meetings, and Chet being a new face in this, Mickey as well, they're scrutinizing that budget too. How do the things that we have in our budget compared to what they're used to seeing from other communities that they've run? So another good reason to have new eyes on this.
May I make another perspective?
Sure.
So, is my mic on? No. Okay now? Oh, I just need to be a rock star and put my lips on it.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, bad for you.
I'm sorry, y'all.
So, taking from Marty's what Marty talked about, the financial responsibility of us to maintain this. We all moved here, 100% of us. No matter what street you live in, what neighborhood you live in, we went to a bank or we had to cash money. However, we qualified and we packed up our things from all over the country, all across the world actually, and we moved to Tellico Village. We can all afford to live here. And our responsibility on this board and this POA staff is to maintain the equity of your home, to maintain that value. A big part of it that we moved here was our, let's call it, owner value. So we come here, we've got golf courses, walking trails, et cetera, and we look around and we say, what a wonderful place to live. And then we meet one another and we say, we're moving here. Then we realize we don't have a state income tax, et cetera, and then we decide that we're going to pack our things and move, which 100% of us did. Our obligation is to maintain that owner value and try our best to keep owner cost as low as we possibly can while maintaining everything. Our obligation is not to have somebody, and I know this sounds terrible, but it's the fact, is not to lower the cost to the point that anybody can move in here. I mean, my wife and I could have bought a house that we could not afford to eat bread or have a car or buy fuel on the lake in Fort Loudon that cost approximately $4 million. I can't afford that house and then eat. So we could all afford to live here. But our obligation on this board and this staff is not to lower the cost so much that anybody can, whether you're blue collar, white collar, extremely wealthy, or just barely making it, because we all had our responsibility to analyze the cost of living here, and we did, and we packed up and moved. So I wanted to leave that so people watching wouldn't say that we're not going to lower the cost, you know, okay.
Yes, sir. What you got for us? Yes, sir. You're up.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Richard, and I'm a resident of Tellico Village. And thank you for taking the time to explain a few things here today and for your service. My background's from the corporate insurance background. That's what I did for 30 years before I retired. So my question, Chet, is from an insurance standpoint, do we have a risk manager on staff that actually evaluates all of our insurances, or are we relying on an outside agent to do that on our behalf?
I think my answer to that is yes.
To what?
We have both.
We have both. Okay, so we have somebody qualified on staff
Yeah.
to evaluate what the risk manager who's working for us
Sure.
is taking care. Thank you.
And we have layers, actually, of that.
Say that again, please.
We have multiple layers of risk management going on in the community right now as we speak.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And then, do we also have on staff so to speak, a compliance officer. And what I mean by that is obviously we just went through a catastrophe at Tanasi, and there were some things maybe that hadn't been looked at, possibly might not look, or could have been prevented in terms of the fire. So I'm wondering if we're taking a look at our existing buildings and our existing properties to make sure that we don't have those shortfalls here presently.
So, to that end, I currently have our fire department inspecting all of the buildings that the POA owns or has any interest in once a quarter. And we get a report back from them, and we have to repair them. That also goes to our insurance. And the whole goal here, and all of my staff, and I'll say it here in front of y'all, we will never have another fire here. We can't. We just cannot. And so whatever we have to do, I mean, unless God comes down and strikes one of our buildings with lightning, should never, ever have a fire here. There's no reason for it or any excuse.
Thank you. And then lastly, with regards to this display that you have up here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for putting that up there, even though we can't read it to the greatest degree. No problem. Is there a place where we can see that, say, on the website? Or where it's more vivid, where we can all look at, expense and revenue coming in?
Yeah, we post all the monthly revenue or monthly statements that we put out when we review those at the board. Well, everything that's there is put online so that you can review that.
Like this 10-year
The 10-year plan is there. If you look under the budget section, it should be there, because that was one of the things that had to be approved.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your time.
And not only that, but if you go to finance, and you'll see a web page. I know you can't see it, and they couldn't load it up for me. But if you'll see a page like this under the finance. This is our audited statements that go all the way back to 2010.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Wendy Lamel from Tokwa. I want to go back to what the first speaker spoke about. I think at the end of the last board meeting, I heard you casually mention that you are going to resubmit House Bill 1116.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think I also heard the board mentioning the importance of continuous improvement. I think Mr. Orr mentioned Six Sigma, but I think probably a great many of us have been soaked in TQM, CI, even re-engineering. Mm-hmm. And you consider that important, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we have if you really believe in continuous improvement, you have policies and you have procedures that you need not just to have, but you need to follow. And we have what I thought was a pretty good policy called the Open Communication Policy on the POA website. We also have something I mentioned at another board meeting, which was the Procedure 18 from that policy. In that policy, it mentions that no official action is you can discuss issues and strategy privately, you can come to those conclusions, but no official action is taken, so long as no official action is taken. So I would consider your going to the Representative Lowell Russell an official action. Mm-hmm. And I know the board has very graciously allowed you to take all the responsibility for that. I also know that you consider yourself a hired hand. So has the board given you permission, without talking really any more about it to the rest of the community, have they given you permission to resubmit that proposal to Mr. Russell?
Well, I don't mean to split hairs with you, but what I said is I will resubmit. It has not been resubmitted. It is on hold. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be looking at the language in that. And before it is resubmitted, it will be brought back to the board and to the community for review.
Thank you. That is very good to know.
I'm Jerry Malk. I live in Tomatlake Greens. I have two questions.
Sure.
What are we spending $11 million for next year?
Which one are you looking at?
The second line there, second column, the capital spending.
Well-
It's pretty constant across the board except for next year. Why?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Maybe I can help answer some of that. The Tanasi building is going to be up, and we have some
That makes
major
sense.
sewer and water repairs going in.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, second question is, can you explain more about this AT&T issue that came up in the last teleflash?
I'm sorry, say again?
The AT&T issue that came up?
Oh, AT&T.
Yeah.
What's that? Did you guys have a comment? And I'm not sure exactly which AT&T issue you're talking about, because I got a couple with AT&T right now. The cable.
Yeah, the cable.
Franchise cable. Now I'm with you, sorry. So what we're doing is we're negotiating currently with AT&T about them bringing in their lines into Telco Village.
Yeah, but hasn't that already happened?
They started.
Because they've already went across my property years ago.
They did not get permission. In fact, that's
They
part
never
of that.
got permission to do that work.
They were acting on I love this story too. They were acting on a bill that was passed in, I believe it was 1920, 1913, sometime, 1927. And that bill says that they have the right to put in telegraph lines and telephone lines anywhere they want. And we came back to them and said, oh, but it doesn't say anything about fiber optic, and it doesn't say anything about internet, and it doesn't say anything about cable TV. And so we've stopped their progress at this point, and we're negotiating with them, and the hope is that we will come to a negotiation so that they can continue to give the community several options, but they need to be able to pay to be in our infrastructure.
Mention the other one that is currently
Well,
paying.
Spectrum is already here, and I don't want to even get into a discussion about whether you love or hate Spectrum, but nonetheless, Spectrum has the ability and has been paying into the community for being able to run their infrastructure throughout the community. So they're not here for free. And they pay both for cable TV and for internet. So there's two different structures there. And the same is what we're asking of AT&T.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood what that was all about.
Sure, no, it's a fair question, for sure.
Good afternoon. My name is Marilyn Moretti. I've lived here in the village for 11 years. I'm in my 12th year. And I want to make a couple of observations. I'm in the process of training to do the Camino de Santiago walk in northern Spain. And in order to be able to do that, I'm going to have to get myself up to where I can walk 8 to 10 miles a day for a number of days. So I've been involved on the trails, and I have a couple of observations to make. The first is that I've found in walking the trails, the larger ones that go into the ravines, I have found an alarmingly large number of dead wood and trees in there, to the point where I think we have some potential fire hazards in a number of areas within the village. The worst that I've seen is the one that is near the fire station. On Cheddar Road, if you go past the fire station to Otsima, take a right, and then take the immediate first left, it's Kagwa, you will come to the entrance of the Firehouse Carry Trail at that point. And in walking in there about 10 yards, I realized that there was an unbelievable amount of dead wood in there. On the right side alone, there have to be at least 30 trees that are over, some dead, some trees have been cut from adjacent property and dumped in there. And there's a lot of dead wood. There's probably 8 to 10 acres in that site, and I certainly would encourage all of you to stop by and look at that property. I think that there is considerable probability and possibility for fire if there were an electrical shortage, if lightning struck, if there were some small children out playing campsite and ignited leaves or some of the fire wood that's out there. I then said to myself, aha, well, if there's a fire, where would they put it out? Where would the water come from? So I got in my car and I drove around, and the only fire hydrant that I could find was a block away at Chota Road in Chahiga. I drove into the neighborhood there in that area, and I didn't see a fire hydrant anywhere. So I know that Cooper took the minimum effort to put up fire hydrants, but we are now a very dense and fully impacted community. Houses are within a few feet of each other. We have excessive amounts of wood that is potentially ignitable and could spread very quickly and easily to residential neighborhoods adjacent to those properties. So I'd like to suggest that perhaps the fire chief with an arborist and maybe someone like Steve Trudnak, who used to chair the ACC committee and who's very knowledgeable about the rules in this community. Mr. Hockey is having been involved with the environmental subcommittee of the POA board a couple of years ago, is also very knowledgeable about the rules that exist for this community, but that there be an appropriate group of people who go out and study some of these properties. I think it's time to look at them seriously and address them related to fire. I also think that the subject of fire hydrants needs to be looked at and addressed, because there simply is no way that a fire truck carrying, 500 gallons of water, whatever they carry, could put up a fire if one got going in the neighborhood. And we also, another risk factor that's out of our control, is that we do have a number of people here who have dementia. And one of the things that they do is put things on the stove and then walk away and forget it. And house fires often start, because of that reality. So there are just things to consider, and I'm simply making an observation to you based on what I've seen. The second point related to trails is that I am at the point where I'm going from trail to trail because I have to get myself up to walking 8 miles in a consecutive period of time for a consecutive period of days. And I recently parked my car at Truist Bank to get on the Turkey Trace Trail, and then I jumped over to the trail at Chota Road, which is Tugaloo Track. Well, I did not realize that there was more than one trail there, because the map of that area shows only one trail there connecting over to the wellness center wherein I was going to take Firehouse Carry back to my car at the bank. So not realizing that I got on another trail, I ended up at the corner of Sasa and Wahuhu, which is somewhere beyond the two communication towers. I was way out in the far side of Chota. And now, when I realized where I was because of those towers, I realized that I was 4 or 5 miles away from my car. I had to get my husband to come and get me because I really it was late afternoon, and it was just not feasible to walk back. So we have professional staff in our employ, and we have, I think, pay them very good salaries. And I don't think it's so difficult to get the maps adjusted. There's a lot wrong with the maps, as I found as I've been doing almost all of the trails. I have already submitted a 2-page single-space observation to the appropriate people, and this situation happened subsequently, but the maps don't have all the trails. You can get lost, you can go to the wrong way. It's a problem. That's my comment on trails and fire. The last thing, I did submit a question a month ago regarding the assessments paid by people who live at the neighborhood, and I look forward to a response sometime in the not-too-distant future.
Say the last part, I'm sorry.
I submitted a question to you a month ago
About what?
about the assessment paid by the residents of the neighborhood, the assisted living facility community.
Gotcha. Sorry, that was the part I was missing. I couldn't
Yes, and
determine
so
which
I
one
look
you're talking
forward
about.
to a response in the
Yes.
not-too-distant future.
Absolutely. So, to answer some of your questions quickly, the trees are being, I'm looking at those with both Public Works and with the Parks and Recs because of how it affects, as you accurately put it, the trails. The trails are handled by Simon, and I'll have a discussion with him about improving or at least updating those trail maps so that people can find out and figure out where they are. And last but not least, the fire marshal and I have already had at least 2 very lengthy discussions about installing fire hydrants every 1,000 feet everywhere in the community. And so that's
Yeah, I think that will be a considerable expense to do that kind of work, but I think it needs to be seriously considered and
well, it has to
probably
be
done.
seriously considered because it's a life safety issue.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
You bet.
I'm John Modesto. I bought a house here about 4 years ago and been here full-time for about 3 years. I'd like to compliment you on approaching the short-term rental issue next month. I was glad to hear that because I think these Airbnbs can get carried away and we're best to get ahead of that. Long-term rentals or rentals while people are building a house are fine, but this Airbnb stuff where somebody checks in on a Sunday night at 10 o'clock and checks out a week later at 4 in the morning or something, we don't need that in here. We really don't need Airbnb short-term rentals, so I was really glad to hear you're going to approach that next month. Since I've been here the last 3 years, we've built 2 new clubhouses for multi-million dollars and bought $5 million worth of land, which was a purchase I don't understand, but it's history anyway. It was done in secret with a do not disclose agreement, and that's the way they did business last year or 2 years ago when they bought that. And now we're facing a $3.5 million insurance payment on a building which will likely cost $7 million to replace at Tenassi. And then we're short on reserves. Well, all this, when I do the math on this, I come up with we shouldn't have bought the $5 million worth of land, that maybe that has been a money pit, and we need more money in the reserves because we spent $5 million on land, and now we're facing another $7 million for another clubhouse. I would like to, I'm not anti-reserve. If we have a reserve problem, I'm with you. We need to get ahead of that. But at the same time, we're acting like we're Washington. We're spending money, and we're going to solve inflation by spending money. Is kind of the way they look at it. Well, we're going to solve our deficit on the reserves by spending money on new buildings and on $5 million worth of land, which I don't know if that's producing any income or not. Some of it may be, but it just seems to me like we need to put a lid on this spending. I don't understand why we spend $400,000 a year on a welcome center. The land is sold. It could be sold. The lots that are remaining are questionable value. To spend $400,000 a year on a real estate promotion center and welcome center, the realtors are perfectly capable of financing real estate sales or promoting that part of it. I don't see where we need to spend that. So that's really where I'm at. Is if you need more money for reserves, I get it. And I started out really opposed to the $2,500 thing, but now I can kind of come around to seeing that. But at the same time, don't go spending $7 million on a clubhouse. Don't go any secret land deals for $5 million. Get a lid on the spending. So that's my deal.
All right, you bring up something that I'm going to talk about for 2 seconds because I think I have left you with the wrong impression. There's nothing wrong with our finances today. There's actually nothing wrong with our finances probably in the next 2 years. But because it's my job, I've got to tell you the train's coming. And if we don't prepare for it now, it is not about wild and crazy spending or we need to pump up the dollars more and more. It's just, I know that even now, and I'll give you a simple, small example that really, in terms of value, you're going to go, yeah, whatever. But it's true, and it's an example that pervades itself through almost everything that we're doing within the community. Last year, you could buy a 30-gallon tank of specific chemicals that are used on golf courses and grass for $60. The most recent purchase was $600. And those are the things that I see coming. Now, is that true of everything? Of course not. No, not everything has seen that kind of inflation. But I have to be cognizant enough to say, you're right, today we're good, and we're not really crazy out of money. In fact, we're financially very solid. But the train's coming. And if inflation and the way things are happening within the financial world of our community, I have to be ahead of it, not behind it. And so that's why I bring up these things. That's why I'm trying to find ways to fund the reserves, because there may come a time when things are beyond my control in terms of increase of costs or whatever, that I do have to come to you and ask for an assessment. And I'm fighting that tooth and nail. And so I don't want people to walk out of this building thinking, oh my God, the sky's falling. It's not. But it is beginning to droop, and we're going to have to look at it and really come up with the ways that we can finance these things ahead of time. We don't want to wait to the last minute and then say, oh wow, we need to stop this or start that or pay more or pay less. We need to evaluate it and have a structure moving forward so that we never get to that point. I hope that sort of answered your question.
Well, I understand what you're saying. I just think that we could put a lid on the spending and shift it over to the reserves. I don't know that we need a third new golf course clubhouse.
Well, I mean,
Our golf
I don't,
grounds-
yeah, I'm not in a place to argue that particular point with you. That's something that the board would have to weigh in on. But the one thing I can argue with you is back to my job. I can never stop spending money to repair and to maintain and to keep the quality of life that we just today have. That will never stop. And so the idea that we can put a lid on spending is it's naive, because it'll never happen. We have to. We have to maintain this community, because that's the value of your home. Trust me, those of you who live on the water or live on the golf course, if you took your house and moved it out to central Loudoun County, I can assure you your house would not be worth anywhere near what it is here. And so that's the point I'm trying to make. It's not that I disagree with you. We don't want to be spending willy-nilly, and I think I used the example, we don't want to be the people who just won the lottery. Yeah, we got the money to build a big place, but do we have the money to sustain it and maintain it and keep it going for years to come? That's the question.
Well, you had a study done on the reserves, and you said you appraised all the assets of the community, of all the buildings and all the assets. I'd be curious to see what the appraisal was on that $5.3 million worth of land you bought. I'd be real curious to see where that came in, and if it was and if the appraisal was a comparison.
Chet, let me address this.
Sure,
Since I was board president when it happened.
Okay.
About 4 years ago, the former developer, Cooper Communities, approached the board of directors and the general manager of Tellico Village and said, I'm leaving. You have a choice. I can sell you the developer rights, which was more important than the land, by the way, or I can just sell them. My plan B is to sell them to whoever wants to give me money for them, which would have made the community a lot less hospitable, because you would have had people with developer rights all over the place in here. What we got for $5 million was some developable land, all of our boundary properties, and all of the developer rights on every property here in the village, which means we can control our own destiny. And that's what the board was after when they did it.
And to give you, excuse me, Marty, but to give you an example, so Alice and I live in Coity. So if you're coming from Lenore City and you're coming into Tellico Village, you know where the boat ramp is on the left as you're coming in, and you know where the pond is on the right. Go back a little bit where the first neighborhood that goes up that great big hill that's on the verge of the lake, or on the shoreline of the lake. Right across the street from that is Poplar Springs Road. Turns back into Loudoun County. That corner was owned by the developer. Can you imagine what Rick was just saying? If somebody came along and said, we're going to put a Love's truck stop there, or we're going to put a a high-rise storage unit there. Now, your first entrance to Tellico Village, on the left is a beautiful sign with a waterfall, and on the right is a U-Haul rental storage. That was one of the reasons that we elected to take over those developer rights, which are all important. Every piece of property that we acquired, when that developer, CCI in Arkansas, would have sold it, broken it up to sell to get his revenue out of it, to get out of Tellico Village, that piece of property carries individual developer rights. So if you live borderline next to a piece of Cooper-owned property, they could have done anything they wanted. Low rent income housing, high-rise buildings, boat docks, ramps, storage units, whatever they want, because it was critical that we, Tellico Village, acquired the developer rights to maintain the continuity of what we've done for the last 35 years. That's why we did it.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add one more comment. You used the term secretive. Yes, during the negotiations, those were done in private sessions, and that's because we didn't want to get into a bidding war with somebody else. But the whole deal was contingent upon communicating to the residents and being sure something wasn't brought up in those meetings that would have made us change our mind. So nothing secretive about that. It was wide open, and we intentionally made sure that we could back out if we needed to, if we happened to overlook something, which during those meetings, nothing further came out that we didn't already uncover. So just want to be clear.
Yes, Beth is pointing out that it's self-funding. We got land that will eventually be developed, and when we develop that land or hire a developer to do it, we will recoup all of the money we spent.
Please, ma'am, go right ahead.
So good afternoon, Chet and board. My name's Linda Garza. As you know, I'm a resident here in the South Toqua neighborhood. A lot of what you've talked about this afternoon has been about the value of our homes and what you do to look after them, and we appreciate that. I personally greatly appreciate your volunteer work that you provide to the community. Right now, I am very concerned about the value of my home and my neighbors' homes. We are currently located in the area where LUB has decided, or at least I'm being told, they're considering moving the power lines from their current easement area that has been there for 30 plus years to the opposite side of the street. They are now clear cutting up to my neighbors' homes within 20 feet of their backyard. When we purchased our homes, some of us have been here a year, some of us have been here 5 years. The value of that property was as we saw it, and that was there wasn't going to be electric poles in our backyard. I don't know what's going on, Chet. I don't know who to call. I would gladly take your advice and input for our neighbors whose our property value is going to be significantly diminished if we end up with power poles in our backyard along 444 between the Clear Creek Bridge and South Toqua Road. Any insight? Anything you can do to help us?
Well, I can tell you that the people you need to call is LUB.
I've made one call. I'll keep making them.
And they will tell you exactly what I'm about to tell you, because I had this conversation yesterday afternoon. And that is, they are on their easement, and they have the right to move that wire from one side of the street to the other because they are still within their easement. And by the way, I'm not telling you to like this, I'm just giving you the facts. And as I understand it, and there's some other questions to be asked, but as I understand it, that is their right in terms of that easement and what they have been given by TDOT in terms of an area where they can move lines or keep lines and that sort of stuff, that is not our property to dictate to them what they can and cannot build. I don't know that that's absolutely a fact because I've not seen it in writing yet, but that is the answer I've been given thus far.
I'd appreciate any support you can give us to stop it. Thank you.
Oh, good evening, anyways. My name is Rick Rossetto. I live in Tokwa. I just want to thank you for your service, and Chet, welcome to the village.
Thank you.
I wanted to find out whether or not the bill that we gave Representative Russell, is that got to wait till next year now that their sessions are almost over?
I'm sorry, I still didn't get your answer.
Do we have to wait till next year?
Yes, absolutely. The answer to your question is yes. And that's why I said I will be going through the language. We'll be trying to improve it or change it as necessary, get advice from everybody else, bring it back to the association so they know exactly what the language of that is before I submit it. Now that I understand the process, I have a little better handle on that. But right now, it will not be done this year. No, sir.
Okay, that's too bad.
It is regrettable, but that's the case.
It is what it is. And then to the previous ladies, I mean, for the utility company maybe to be a good neighbor, can they put these wires underground?
Yeah, that's a question, guys. You're way out of my pay grade.
Oh, I'm out of my lane.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the answer is I've lived in different parts of the country, and I've lived in Montana where, and I'm not kidding, I know this is funny, but it's not, people die from running into power lines on their vehicles because the snow is so deep. And you would think they'd put it underground, but they don't. And I've lived in other places where there is not a power line to be seen because all the wires are underground.
I mean, these wires and poles went down because we had a lot of wind and a really bad storm. If you put it underground, problem solved long term.
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately, that's an LUB question and a decision that they have to make.
Do they partner at all, or, I mean?
Oh, you know, I can call them and get answers from them and give them suggestions. But at the end of the day, it's their budget.
Oh, it's their decision. Absolutely, but.
Yeah, I'm kind of at their disposal, so to speak.
Well, thank you very much.
I have no control over them.
Thank you for your service.
Sorry, I mean, I know everybody's upset about that, and I wish I could tell you, here's the facts. But until I see it in writing, I really can't say that here's the facts. This is what I've been told.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Ganch. I'm a recent resident of Tokwa.
Yes, sir.
And the question I have is for you or the board. Can you tell me how you evaluate the marketing department's success? Do you have key performance indicators? And have they been shifting as the community progresses into, being a blank piece of land now to a much more developed piece of land? Thank you.
Board, you want to wade in, or I'll wade in? I don't care. My position on marketing, period, is they have to pay for themselves. And so every year I look to Beth to whatever ways they can cut money, save money, spend money, to get money. At the end of the year, they need to be self-sustaining. And to be frank with you, I'm trying to approach everything that has to do with the management side of Tellico Village in that same manner, is that we all need to be paying for ourselves. We all need to be making improvements and cost savings and changing in policies in every way we can to save every penny we can, regardless of what our budget is. I mean, and to be, I guess, kind of really honest with you, I really don't care if you said, Chet, we don't care. Just do whatever you need to do. I'd still be doing the same thing because that's good business, period. Yes, sir.
Cliff Claggett, I live on Chattooga Way. About 5 and 6 years ago, I have a whole house water filter that's white, and back then, about every 2 to 3 months, it turned dark brown. And I complained about it. Somebody came out and looked. And then I understand you got connected with some other city water supply somehow, and it got better. I only had to change the filter maybe once every 4 months. But I got a separate water filter just for drinking water at the sink in the kitchen. And we only use it for drinking water and ice and so forth.
Sure.
But that filter was supposed to last 9 months to a year for a family of 4. And we're a family of 2, and it's been in there for 3 months, and the light is flashing that the filter needs to be changed. So I'm wondering if there's another filter that could be put in sometime, somewhere before it gets to my house. And I don't know what the situation is in other people's house, but, we're drinking dirty water is what it looks like.
Well, let's see. I can answer this in a couple ways. I'll give you an anecdotal answer that's personal. I'm in the process of buying a house. That's right, I will be a Tellico villager. And in that process, and so in saying that, I just want to throw out, just remember, every time I come up with one of these things that we need to do, guess whose pocket it's coming out of too. So that being said, where I was going with that is the builder asked me if I wanted to put in a water filter, and I said, why is that? And he says, because I always usually put them in every house I build. So I'm not sure what the answer is on the purity of the water or the particulate level in the water, but I know that I have some questions into Loudon about that. I know that Loudon actually is in the process of building I don't think I'm misquoting him, $70 million water treatment plant that they're going to bring online to be able to give us more water and hopefully better quality water. And anecdotally also, someone asked me a couple days ago why they are running the pipe underneath the river to go from Loudon side of the river to the Lenore City side of the river. And it is because TDOT will not let them use the bridge. That was a fascinating answer to me, but that's the reason why they're going underground. Please, ma'am.
I just had a quick question. I was wondering if there was any update on the restaurant contracts for the yacht club and the golf courses?
We have sent out, is it 5? 8. We are sending out 8 RFPs to 8 different vendors who are going to hopefully bid on it. And once those comes in, we will take those to the board, evaluate them, and see if we can put a plan together. But that will happen this coming week? Next week. Okay, perfect. So yeah, we've gotten to the point now where RFPs are going out. And I was kind of surprised that we had 8 different vendors who are asking to bid on it. It wasn't that we had to chase them down. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Linda Fall, and I am an owner, as well as my husband, Tom Fall, in Tellico Village. And it came as a surprise to me when at our last town hall meeting, that we were in a position to be concerned about things like reserves and whether or not, we had sufficient reserves either for present or for future. Particularly because it seems last year that we had such assurance that we were in such good financial condition that we were going to be able to buy the Cooper property. And I appreciate what's been said today and I now have a further understanding of why it was a great idea, or reaffirming that it was a great idea. But I'd like to know when, as I believe is Pat, is the gentleman next to Pat, who, thank you, had said that when we use those, our control over those developer fees, that we're going to recover our entire $5,000. Is that correct?
That was the plan.
That's the plan?
And that is the plan. We have developable properties. We're asking for bids on people to develop those properties.
Oh, we already
And
are
by
in
the
the-
way, they will actually have to comply with all of our standards. If we hadn't done the deal and they had sold developer rights to other people, they would not have to comply with what we do.
But there is no guarantee then that we will recover our cost.
Well, there are never guarantees, but it's pretty likely that somebody's going to want to develop this land.
When we do recover, as we begin to recover the costs, we hope, where will those funds go? Could they go into reserves?
Well, the first place they'll go is to pay off the debt. So we'll expunge that debt. Anything that's left beyond that would go into the reserves.
What is our debt?
What was the number? It was at 3.25, I believe. Yeah, it was $3,250,000 was the debt that we incurred when we bought the developer rights.
Okay. Thanks for refreshing my memory. In the event that we experienced a crisis, we had a catastrophe, this is an asset that we could sell? I'm just asking a question. I'm not asking whether or not
Well,
it's-
what we're doing is selling, we're actually are asking developers to develop the land. We'll sell the houses. We will never, ever give up the developer rights. That's not an asset we're ever going to sell.
That isn't. Okay. Thank you.
Beth Kaburka, Marketing, Communication, and Development. I just want to add on top of this, I'm a POA employee, is that the cost or the money that we get every single month on what we purchased from CCI was docks, the commercial building behind the Welcome Center, and the monies that we bring in from those assets cover the monthly cost for the loan. The land that we will sell in bulk will help pay off the loan faster, but it is self-sustaining on a monthly basis. Thank you.
Yeah, we got more than just the land and the developer rights. We got all the docks that Cooper owned. We got all the parking lots, which, by the way, we did not own. And we got the commercial center.
It pays for the loan?
It pays the servicing charges on the loan.
Go ahead, guys, we aren't done yet.
My wife has already introduced me. And I'm happy to say I can actually read that, so I feel pretty good about life in general.
Yeah.
My question is the projected ending reserve balance after approximately 10 years is the target that you're hoping for?
That's the plan as we speak.
Does that include the possible $2,500 buy-in fee?
Not a chance.
So that $2,500 buy-in fee is over and above the...
Correct. So the goal in that, just to be clear, is every year we have to evaluate what the reserves need to be, because the value of that building over there last year is not the value it is this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're constantly having to kind of move that needle a little bit. And my goal is, rather than constantly come to you and we'll use crazy numbers, rather than coming to you with a CPI increase or coming to you with even a 5% increase, I would prefer to find other ways to help fund the reserves so that we can control. I mean, the $7 million that we need doesn't go away, it only goes up. And so if I can find a way to fund that, even if it's at just $1 million a year, that's better than me coming to you and saying I need more money. And so that was the whole principle behind that, is to try and fund it from a way that's not directly taking money out of the entire community's pocket.
Okay. As an as a possible alternative to a buyer's buy-in fee to augment the reserves? Are we charging contractors, developers, and so on fees for coming in here and making money on the homes and buildings and so on that they put up? Are we already doing that, or is that something that could be done in the future, or can
It's
the
something
fee-
I'm looking at. As I understand it, it is not currently being done. Now, there are fees that they have to pay to get permits and those kind of things, but they're not significant, if that's where you're going with that. And so, yes, I'm looking at those possibilities as well. Believe me, there's no stone that I'm not going to unturn and try and play for this.
Okay. Because this community is the goose that laid the golden egg. Any builder that would love to come in here and build a home up until perhaps this moment, with the market getting a little softer, they would be in line trying to build homes here and making a good profit.
Sure.
And there's no reason in the world that they can't maybe kick in an extra 1,000 or 2 on their own.
Got it.
So I have one comment. Can you hear me? On your reference to this reserve forecast, Mickey, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you put in there an assumption of a 5% assessment increase every year. So that's built into these numbers, but that's the only thing as far as the revenue side of it that's incremental. Nothing else is in place yet.
And that takes me back to why that dollar figure would help supplement that.
And that becomes the decision every year then, when we do the budget, you know, the 5% or the CPI that we can go up, how much of that do we need to go up? So a lot of that is based on, you know, if we could have had this $2,500 thing, I think I figured out if we sell anywhere between 300 and 350 homes a year, which is basically the pace that we're on, that's equivalent to $750,000 plus, which is then equivalent to roughly 6-7% of an assessment increase. So something to keep in mind.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, by the way, is that your husband sitting there?
That is. I know.
Wait a minute, isn't
We've
this
more
double
than taken
dipping,
our
kind of?
turn
I don't
today.
know, yeah.
I just wanted to say that over the years, what we've experienced and what we have heard from other people, our monthly assessments are honestly a pretty good deal. We get things that other homeowners associations don't receive. It's remarkable the things that are provided by the POA. And my husband and I talk about options and, gee, should they raise the monthly assessments? Should we do a special assessment? Is the $2,500 a good idea? But I wanted to let you know that I really think that you provide an incredible amount of services for what we're paying. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, let me too. So along those same lines, and thank you very much, but we can't take credit for this. This goes back 35 years. There are volunteers that have been on advisory committees. Every committee we have has been here. They're all volunteer property owners that are saying, I want to have an interest and an advisory position that I can direct or advise on which direction this community grows. There have been 35 years of board members that are volunteers and all property owners. So it's not just us. We just happen to be the ones to sit here today and either take today's criticism or today's accolades. But it's 35 years of people that, and I know there's all these issues with past POA and the Madisonville Mafia, and I've heard all those rumors. But at the same time, when Alice and I moved in here in 2017, those people are the ones that attracted us. And the ones that moved in here in 1999, those people prior to that made this community that attracted them. And it's going on today. And talking with all of these people and all the people that I've served on this board with, everybody on this board that I've met is overwhelmingly satisfied, thrilled to live here for the very reason that you said, and really, really strives to make this the community for the next group of people that move in, that they see exactly the same thing. So thank you very much, but it goes back a long way before we ever got here.
Come on up, boss.
Rick Sloan, I live in Tanasi. Chet, did I hear you correctly a minute ago when you said that your objective was to have departments pay for themselves? What is our budget for marketing? And to what extent does the marketing department a profit center versus a cost center?
Yeah, go ahead. Jump in.
In February at the board meeting, the marketing department did a year-end summary for 2022 that shows all cost and revenue that was generated. That has been shared on the chat on the online video. You can also find that on the POA website under Departments, Marketing and Communication, and the 2022 summary. I recommend that you look at it, but we brought in over $1 million last year.
Well, I would go on record and say that I'm not a fan of digital marketing, and I think that Telco Village is no longer a secret, and we could reduce our overhead and our expenses in that area if we cut back in that area. I would also say that I'm a fan of the reserve study, a fan of the 3 R's. But one of the things that we could do to help ourselves out would be to trim back to some extent when it comes to right-sizing, perhaps right-sizing departments, right-sizing projects, right-sizing staff, and not to be too repetitive, but even right-sizing the marketing spend. Don't build things that we haven't paid for. The Long Range Planning Committee, I believe, had approved Pickleplex. You voted 7-0 for Pickleplex.
Not to disagree, but they don't approve anything.
They recommend?
That's right.
Okay, but you approved. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the intention was for the Pickleball Club and Timeless Teleco to pay for the project. Is that correct?
So the way it works out is way back when long-range planning, and I think it was a couple of surveys ago, identified that pickleball was a growing, massively growing sport. And fortunately, we had some pickleball courts, and we got to see that it was, in fact, growing leaps and bounds. And what happens is long-range planning goes out and does their survey, and they take the numbers, and they said, long-range plan, 10 years out, according to the budget, you're going to need to expand your pickleball complex in 2025. So way back when, Rick and I and Steve were on the board back 17, 18, 18, we approved that budget process, and we're looking at a number 2025. So Rich Caracas and some of the pickleball people called and said, so we think that date needs to be moved up to like 2021. So we got together, a number of us did, and including pickleball folks and accounting folks, and ran the numbers again. And we relied heavily on the number of houses that we're building, the real estate market, the churn of existing property owners in Telco Village. And we saw that it was growing, but the number was still 2025. So they were not happy with that. And that's okay, but we can't justify spending 3 years out to move up because somebody wants something, you got to prove and justify it. So what we did then is, not we, they went to Timeless Teleco and wrote a business plan. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to raise the money to get the project moved forward as much as we can. So they did. And as they did, every single year, Marty's a pickleball player, the prices jacked up. They went out, got the contract, got the bid, and the price was higher. To what Chet was talking about. The project was running away from them. So then as time goes on, we, the board and long-range planning and everybody that looks to these projected numbers, look again at pickleball numbers, and it had moved up to 2022 because we've had all these 300 and something people move in here, and pickleball is going absolutely berserk. So we as a board elected then to take the funds, what was it, 200, 300 grand that they raised? They raised 220. So they raised 220.
Right.
We threw in the difference, and they put the pickleball courts in, and we put the roof on. We did, property owners. And we moved the pickleball project up 2 years based on the information that we got on the need, not the want.
I think my point is it's not that it isn't a nice amenity. It's not that it's not something that may have come to pass a year or two down the road. But when you look at the money you spent on that, when you're facing what you're facing with respect to water and sewer, I think we would all agree the water and sewer is probably a priority over extending ourselves with the pickleball.
Yeah, absolutely.
facility.
I had Steve run me some numbers, and I'll ask Beth and Chet if they would put this graph on there. But Steve ran me some numbers because I started looking at exactly what you were asking and questioning my interpretation. But we went in 2013, looking at that. Actually, it goes all the way back to 2011. I don't want to be confused, but what I do is I have a graph here that's based on changes in cash balances that relate to reserves. And in 2011, we were less than $1 million, actually less than $250,000 going into January in cash. That went below. We had actually below no cash reserves in 2012. The board raised the assessment, and that's where it started. You know, we've always had the 5%, that's what you hear, that's where it started. They went to 4.09%, and then it dropped down back almost $1 million short in cash in 2014, and then it dropped to about 200,000 in 2015, and this was after the third year of the 5%, it then goes above. So now we have a reserve of almost $1 million, and then in 2017, we raised for 4 years in a row, almost 5%, and the cash reserve starting in January went to 5%. So we had over $1 million in cash reserve. And you remember in 2017, if you were attending the board meetings, the Finance Advisory Committee that year elected to listen to the property owners and not go with the 5%. And sitting in that meeting, they raised their hand and said, we want it to be 2.5%, and they did. And we went below zero in cash reserves for the next 2 years. Him started a 5%, and then the rest of the board has been convinced on these numbers, and we went from zero cash reserves in 2018, the first year we served, to over 19 million projected this year. And I have 5 pages of things that we've done to enhance Tellico Village and maintain that 19 million. I'd be happy to review it with you.
When you come back this year,
I don't come back this year.
when the board comes back this year and says, oh, well, let's have 5% plus the inflation number, we're going to be looking down the barrel of something close.
You'll never have 5% plus an inflation number. It's the inflation number that you're...
Pat, I got it.
Okay, but that isn't what you're saying.
I understand that part of it. Thank you. The other question I have for you, very directly, I've come to accept the fact that we're going to have another Tanasi. another Tenassi clubhouse, and that's probably a good thing. What's your position on meeting rooms in the Tenassi clubhouse?
Meeting rooms in the clubhouse.
Mine personally,
Yes, what's your position on that?
I love meeting rooms.
So you want more meeting rooms in the Tenassi clubhouse?
No, I want to redesign the Tenassi Clubhouse to be more Tellico Village friendly. The other one was a 2-story, actually it was 3 because there was
Okay,
storage
so
on it.
does that mean there will be
Well,
no meeting room
let me answer
in
the
the
question.
Tenassi clubhouse?
I can answer the first question, or I can skip it and you can ask me the second question. Would you want me to answer the first question?
Will there be meeting rooms in the Tenassi clubhouse?
Oh, sure.
Well, are you not the same person that came before the board a couple of years ago with your exhaustive study on meeting rooms? And you came back and said, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you came back and said, it's not that we don't have enough meeting rooms, and I'm paraphrasing here, we need to stop people from trying to meet Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m. all the time.
Oh, I
In
still
other words,
stand
it was
on
a
that.
scheduling issue.
Oh, absolutely.
Not the necessary.
Absolutely,
idea
I
of
still
having
stand on
more
that.
meeting
And
rooms.
one of my biggest issues with our culture is that we have been overbuilt and underpopulated for years, and now we're not anymore. And we need to learn how to schedule meetings and schedule pickleball and schedule tennis, et cetera.
I'm
Wait a
saying
second.
it's a way to decrease the spend on the Tenassi clubhouse if we just bring it into size.
You're asking questions that he can't answer right now. We're going out with RFPs for design of a clubhouse. We don't know what the final design looks like. Nobody here on the board knows what it's going to look
Well, there
like.
was a telegram that came out in the last week.
And yes, we are considering putting meeting rooms in the clubhouse. However, we also have about yay much we can spend. And we'll make those judgments on what makes sense for the village. And to argue about it today makes no sense because we don't have a design.
I'm looking at cost containment, Rick. That's what I'm suggesting.
I understand cost containment as well as anybody here in this room. I used to buy and sell companies, so I kind of get it. You're raising an issue that there's not one soul here that can answer it yet. So we understand what the insurance company is going to give us. We understand what we had already saved to rebuild Tenassi. And until we get the estimates, I can't tell you what it looks like.
The comment that I thought I saw in one of the telegrams was that we were also going out to an architect. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, what happened to the architect who offered his services, who is a resident of the village? So are you going to continue to use him and an additional?
He's a residential guy.
He was helping us out
He
with the
doesn't build
drawings.
commercial buildings.
Yeah, he was helping us out with the drawings. He doesn't do commercial buildings. He wouldn't touch it.
Okay, thank you.
So one last thing that's kind of anecdotal, but not. I have been in this business for 20 years, and I have bought and sold homes in a lot of places, and I've lived in a lot of places. And I'd like it to be clear, not to put too fine a point on it, I could pretty much live in any community I wanted to in this area. I wasn't forced to buy a home in Tellico Village. I chose to buy a home in Tellico Village and build here. And that should tell you my opinion of this community and how vested I am as your CEO and a homeowner in this community. Tellico Village has thousands of things to be proud of and wonderful amenities. And because of that, and because of my investment, and because of my own personal pride in the fact that I have the privilege of being the CEO of this community, I want it to be the very best it can be. And I'm not talking about pricing people out, I'm talking about quality. And that's the goal that I'm trying to bring to you. And that's what the reserves are about. That's what everything I do. And everybody laughs when I say it sometimes, but it is true. I am the hired hand, and this is what you've hired me to do for you. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming, and I hope you got the answers to your questions.